Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Spyweaver here with True Spy Gaming, bringing to you my new attempt at a weekly video, documentary, vlog, whatever you want to call it. I'm calling it the Case Files. The name finally just came to me as if a light bulb went off in the head. This is episode 0001. It's gonna be fun when we get to 0007. I'm going to call it the James Bond episode, but we'll just avoid all those puns for the time being. Basically, my plan is every week to be going over different things that might be issues, questions, concerns, updates, topics, basically anything that could have happened this week in World of Warcraft. Essentially, always going to be opened up in Discord too, in my True Spy Gaming Discord while I'm doing these. Usually I make sure they last about a half an hour as we go. No more, no less area. But if you always wanted to join up in my TSG Discord and join in on the discussion, you can feel free as well. The invite is always there. These are going to either be happening around this time on Monday evenings or sometime early Saturday mornings. But this is the first in what I hope to be a weekly publication. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Case Files, episode 0001. This week on the docket, before we head right into Tomb, we are going to discuss about the changes to the Retribution Paladin, and oh boy, I really wish Blizzard would have given us some lube before they decided to do any of this. All in all, a few of them I agree were needed, but may have as well been overstepping their bounds a little too much, too soon. Either or, take your pick. The big one that I do agree that they needed to do was the change to Divine Hammers. Divine Hammers have basically gotten to the point, and I'm sure we can all agree on this, that it was strictly... It was even what we were using in single target fights. Let's be honest. It's all we were using anytime, anywhere, no matter what fight we were going on, in Nighthold. Which, personally, if you ask me, for a multi-target talent, that's a little unnecessary. A multi-target talent, ideally, you only want it to be beneficial if the fight's a multi-target fight, not a one random ad spawns every 3 minutes fight, so you only get 2 small ads. I mean, you can look at Croesus or Trilliax, good examples of that. Fights that should be single target, but ended up not really mattering. We just used Divine Hammers because it was more of a DPS over Blade of Wrath at the time. Simply for the fact that we got the extra cleave when the ad came out, even if it was only for 15-20 seconds. If you ask me, that is a broken talent. Blizzard's response to this in 7.2.5 was to nerf Divine Hammers, and I'm on board so far. And then I read it was by 25%. Once I read that, I just kind of laughed a little bit. It was a little much, if you ask me. They essentially needed a blooper into the outfield, just barely into the grass, and they went and swung for the fences. Early calculations that I have done now only show Divine Hammers being beneficial if it is a patchwork 3-target fight or a Beast Lord 2-target fight. So, that being said, the only way that we might be looking at wanting to use Divine Hammers is if it is a straight-up continuous AoE fight, 2 or more, 3 or more I should say, or a continuous Beast Lord fight. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like Tomb Sargeras has any of those for us. Most of Tomb's fights actually are looking to be more straight-up single-target, with the occasional add to cleave. And that is about it. There's 1 or 2 fights you could make the argument for being multi-target, but at early stages in PTR testing, it's not looking as such by any stretch of the imagination. So essentially what they did is they took an overpowered talent. Yes, I'll give them that. It was overpowered in its current iteration and how it was working. And they basically just made it completely and utterly useless. Maybe their theory is with their new tier 20 2-piece and 2-piece and 4-piece. Let's just go ahead and bring one of those up here for you. That would overset it. 2-piece Judgment also increases damage of Blade of Justice or Divine Hammers, whichever you're using, by 15% for 8 seconds. So basically the duration of your Judgment buff, essentially. Mine, I think, lasts a little bit shy of 8 seconds. And then the 4-piece Blade of Justice during its initial holy power. So maybe they're thinking with this nerf and tier 20, it'll offset it. Or maybe I'm just giving Blizzard too much credit given stuff that they have done in the past. What does my Judgment debuff last? Yeah, 8 seconds. So basically, you should have 100% uptime on that 2-piece, essentially. The biggest... I'm kind of jumping all over here already. But that 2-piece, what it's going to basically do for us, I'll get back to this a little bit later, is change up our priority a little bit. I mean, if you're using Blade of Wrath, you're already using this priority, but if you're using Divine Hammers, maybe you slid Divine Hammers back a little bit to get that extra of Crusader Strike in, or Divine Storm. But now, since it's buffed essentially by the 15% according to the 2-piece, you're going to want to prioritize Divine Hammers or Blade of Justice 100% of the time. When I was jumping back, Divine Hammers nerf 25%. Doesn't look like that's going to change back anytime soon. I do agree that a nerf was needed there. I don't agree with the amount. I would have probably been happy with a flat 15%. Give or take. That, to me, seems like it would be a nice middle ground. I mean, it would still do enough to where we could use it in fights that had the occasional, add cleave, and not make it feel like we were actually losing out on too much damage, as and still be halfway compatible, because that's what made Ret very competitive in Nighthold, was our ability to basically just tear up the meters when it came to the AoE fights, given the vast majority of them were AoE fights. Alright, so fair enough. We have that ability that's going to let us do this. But they essentially took that away, so now the only way Red is going to even feel halfway worth it is if you have way more concordance than anybody else in your guild, or you just get a piss load of Blade of Wrath procs. Let's be straight up honest here. We're kind of trending back towards how HFC ended up being, where you could have two equally geared people, and you never know who's going to do the most damage, because it just depended on who got the most Divine Storm procs, which was an interesting way of using Divine Storm, if you ask me, as a proc for extra damage. I'm kind of glad they got rid of that mechanic. That mechanic was just not needed. So essentially that's what's happening with Divine Storm. Not Divine Storm, Divine Hammers. The other big one that hit us were the changes, and I don't even know why it's not up on me right now, to Blessing of the Ashbringer. What it gives us now is a 4% increase to strength. We can look at this two ways here. The first way we can look at it is, okay, they thought we were too powerful, so they wanted to overall nerf us yet again. Which, if you look at it that way and calculate it out, it roughly comes out to a 25% nerf. For as I'm sitting at right now, about 36k strength. The 4% gives me roughly 1,500. And Blessing of the Ashbringer used to give us a flat 2,000. Alright, see, that's roughly a 25% nerf by changing Blessing of the Ashbringer. But we can look at it this way now. It fluctuates based on our Concordance proc. So when we get Concordance to proc, Blessing of the Ashbringer essentially procs, gives us more damage, and we do a larger amount of burst damage than we previously would have done. That's one way to look at it. They essentially decided to make our peaks higher and kind of taper off the valleys a little bit. So they wanted to basically kind of tone down our overall sustain, but give us the ability to basically blow shit up as soon as we, hit our wings button. Oh wow, it still let me do that. That was kind of impressive. The other way you can look at this is they're figuring reds were too strong, so they wanted to completely ass fuck us and nerf us once again all over the place and say screw you. Both of those are very legit ways of looking at it. Neither of them are how I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it, and maybe I'm thinking way too far in advance and giving them Blizzard way too much credit here for based on historical data and occurrences of things. But I'm looking at it as they're looking more towards Argus with this talent, since they've already kind of made it clear that they're not going to make any changes further to the artifact weapons themselves. Perhaps they're looking at it like this. Right now, that 2000 is grand. It's really good. It's giving them everything they need. It's basically making them really strong. Come Argus, that 2000 is going to be nothing. Now, why do I say that? I say that because if you look at mythic leveled gear for Tomb of Sargeras tier, adding it all up, putting it together, if none of it Fire Forges or Titan Forges, gives us roughly 45,000 strength. That's not including any changes or new relics in the Ashbringer, and that's not, like I said, including any War Forges or Titan Forges. That's taking the base item level that they offer in Tomb. I always do this and go through those, which was, god dang it, Mythic 930s, 930 to 940 variants. So my theory is if you get the right amount of Warforges and Titan Forges, you could hit 50,000, which is a new breakpoint, which would make Blessing of the Ashbringer equal out what it used to be by the end of this tier. And then going forward into Argus, we'll be getting even more strength on top of that. So instead of just 2,000, perhaps it'll become 2,500. If we're jumping roughly a base of 10,000 strength from this tier, then from Nighthold to Tomb tier, maybe Tomb to Argus tier will be a 15,000 jump base, so maybe we'll be at a base of 60,000 strength overall, doing a crazy amount of damage, which if you ask me, it's going to be ridiculous, and I think they're probably going to have to bring in another stats crunch after we get done with this X-Pack, and that'd be why. Even though it'd be still cool to be spitting out, down in the next expansion, 10 million DPS, but that's just unrealistic and just stupid to think about. Especially when I look back, to ICC days when, I don't know, was it like 50k was really fucking good back then? I think. I mean, it's been forever, but I mean, that's for some reason 50k just sits in my mind right now. So we'll just go with it. I don't want to do these. Mother fricker. Subjugator, and then I guess Crit Versa, but I got Tier on, so I can't really replace that, so let's just go do those. Gotta go do a frickin' invasion for my World Quest, god damn it. So maybe that's how they're looking for it. They're looking forward into Argus, saying, if we do this, we can basically benefit the Paladin more in the future, even though they will take the hit right now. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit. Maybe that's what they were thinking. I guess only time will tell. But then basically what Blizzard did as their way of saying, we're sorry here, we're making up for it, they buffed all of our abilities across the board by a flat 3.5%. Early simulations then were putting us near the, basically plumb near the damn bottom. Right there with Windwalker Monks, where the Zonal Blizzard basically just shafts you without any lube or taking you out to dinner first. That's kind of where it left us. However, there might be a little hope. Blizzard had said that they will be doing a little bit more tuning. That will be in their update or patch this coming Tuesday, so the 20th of June. That will basically be a little bit more class balancing, tuning updates, what have you. Basically to try to realign things once again. Basically all this then ended up being for Retribution Paladins was another flat 3.5% increase to all abilities across the board. So from 7.2 to 7.25, we are getting a flat 7% increase across the board to all of our abilities. And the other thing they did was buff our 2-piece to give us a 20% increase to Blade of Justice instead of a 15. Let's see, these are... Some of these hotfixes take effect the moment they're implemented, while others may require realm restarts. For some reason I brought this up. It says June 19th, and I saw one before too that said that Paladins would get another 3.5%. So I think it's only an overall of 7, so we're only getting another one more 3.5%. I also saw something that stated that our 2-piece on the realm restart was getting a buff of 5%, so it is going to be 20% damage increase while you have your judgment up. After casting judgment for 8 seconds after casting judgment, 2 Blade of Justice / Divine Hammers. So, Havoc, Vengeance, VDH, people bitching about Demon Hunters. I don't know why people are complaining about Demon Hunters, because they've been strong for so long. Vengeance reduced by 5%. That's funny. Warlock, Aff, and Deathstorm reduced by 5% apiece. That is also funny. But maybe they think that 2-piece buff up to 20% instead of 15% on top of another 3.5% overall across the board will be enough to vault us back into competition. I still don't think it was enough. I think instead of a second 3.5%, they needed to actually give it just another flat 5%. And that would have, according to how I was kind of calculating things out, put us about middle of the pack. But, I mean, they're the ones that get paid for this shit. No, I don't. So, who am I to say? So that is kind of what Paladins are looking like so far in 7.2.5. If you ask me, it still didn't play too bad. This previous week in our raid in Nighthold Mythic, I was still, among the top 5 in damage in a guild of people that had all have Concordance, all have gear much higher than my 906 since I joined them just about 2-3 weeks ago. And basically just better geared and better prepared in the fights than I was, but I'm still able to keep up. So I think a lot of people's early reactions are a little unfounded, a little out there. Just I think they're just knee-jerk reactions. They look at that and say, oh my god, this is nerfed by 25%. Oh my god, Blessing of the Ashbring was nerfed as well. Oh my god, you're taking all this away from us. I don't think so. I think once we get that 2-piece and 4-piece out of Tomb, that it's going to play really nicely, especially given the fact that Tomb is feeling like a majority of these single-target fights that is going to almost force us to run Blade of Wrath over Divine Hammers. So for me, the jury's still out on this one. I'm not going to really, pull the trigger on any of my personal opinions on how they have treated Paladins one way or the other in 7.2.5 just yet. But we'll see once I've given it, a week or two of raiding in Legion. Not Legion, in Tomb. Wow. The next thing then I was just kind of looking at going over here. Let's talk about the Tier 20. I'm looking forward. Tier 20 looks itself, basically all they did was copy Tier 6, give it some new updates. Essentially, my theory is they basically did what they thought it should look like if they had the technology and abilities that they do now back then. So what we're looking at for Paladins, let's see if I can just roughly pull up the Mythic, see how it looks. I mean, it doesn't look too terrible, but I personally would have liked a little bit of something else, something a little different than a remake of something they've already done. I personally think it's a little bit lazy. Oh, I probably skipped over the waist. But, I mean, it is what it is. That's what it looks like. It's literally Tier 6. All they did was just pop the book and the hammer off on the shoulders, added the glowy effect, and then basically made things layered here a little bit. We basically made that 3D, the gloves 3D, the sashes on the side of the legs, they made that 3D as well as the front there. They added a little bit of face mask to the helmet itself, because if you remember, the original Tier 6 helmet was just this part. And then they added basically a cape, which if you ask me, that does not even fucking match, and that's the cape from Mythic itself, the Mythic tier cape. So that's essentially what they did there. I think it's kind of funny too how if you look at this, the boots basically aren't wrap around, they're basically just strapped on. But basically, essentially, they did that with all classes except, of course, the ones that didn't exist back then. Demon Hunters, Monks, Death Knights. You guys basically got new shit. Paladins, they basically reworked it. The Tier 20, then, 2-piece on Tuesday will reflect a 20% increase to Blade of Justice and or Divine Hammer damage once after you cast your Judgment. So essentially, Judgment applies another debuff that lasts. This one, it's actually going to be a buff to you that lasts the same amount as the current Judgment debuff. That boosts the damage that Blade of Justice / Divine Hammers itself does. So there's that one. Wow, I probably should pop my wings for this. So it's not too bad. I mean, that in of itself is going to be nice. What it's going to mainly do is, since most of the fights are single target, it's going to force us to run Blade of Justice, not Blade of Justice, Blade of Wrath, and it's going to force us to prioritize that, like right there, over getting our Judgment off or another Crusader Strike. So right there is where it would have been a priority, no matter what my Crusader Strike situation was looking like. Right there, so I don't waste Holy Power. That's how I would have slid it in. Essentially, it's going to just change up the priority a little bit, not too much. It just moves something else to the top of our priority list. That's all it's really doing. And then once we get our 4-piece, it even, if you practice, especially with the 2-piece prioritizing Blade of Justice / Divine Hammers over everything else, once you get your 4-piece, you won't have to change your playstyle at all, because essentially that will be even more critical to prioritize, because Blade of Justice / Divine Hammer, whichever talent you're running, will now apply 2 Holy Power to you instead of an additional Holy Power, I should say, is how it reads. So it'll give us 3 Holy Power instead of, generates 1 additional Holy Power, so it'll give us 3 Holy Power instead of 2. So basically every time you pop a Blade of Justice off or Divine Hammers off, you'll be able to hit a Templar's Verdict. It's going to speed up the rotation a little bit, which is another thing that I don't think people are really taking into account or accommodating for. So essentially, it's going to speed up our playstyle quite a bit. Personally, if you ask me, I think it's kind of needed. It was kind of getting monotonous, and I know plenty of people can agree with me on there. It was getting monotonous in Nighthold, basically doing the same thing over and over. Simple. There was no variance. There was no, if I don't do this at this time, I'm going to be screwed. There was none of that in Nighthold. Let's be honest. especially when it got to the point where we basically just ran Divine Hammers then, instead of using Blade of Wrath, because there was no point, because the intermittent ad spawn made Divine Hammer so much more stronger than Blade of Justice or Blade of Wrath. It was just ridiculous. So it's gonna change up the playstyle just a little bit for us, which I have no problem with, honestly. I'm honestly totally on board with that and kind of excited for it next week. I mean, I'm gonna basically be right on board with grabbing my tier 20 and ditching the tier 19 as soon as possible. Which brings me to another point as well. They ended up nerfing tier 19 basically for most of the classes. Initially, our 2 set for tier 19 was Holy Power Spinning Attacks, dealing 10% more damage. Now it's 7%. And then Holy Power Generating Abilities have a 20% chance. It used to be 25, I believe. Essentially, they nerfed that. Actually, no, they didn't nerf the 4-piece. They nerfed the 2-piece for pretty much every class to dissuade people from running tier 19 to tier 20 4-pieces. So, you know, dissuade people from running 2 tier sets in one, and basically make the decision of what gear to run a lot easier for everyone. Which I'm also kind of bummed that they did, but also glad, because I didn't want to be stuck having to sit here and run with that, you know, 2-piece from tier 19, having to continually run tier 19 just for the fact of getting a high Warforged or Titanforged Mythic tier piece just to be able to be competitive in tier 20, which, if you ask me, just isn't right. You shouldn't have to be forced to run the previous tier's raid to be competitive in current tier. So I'm glad they did that as well. It might be looked as you know, looked forth as asinine, stupid, not needed, but it really was. Because what we were looking at then, if that was the case, was Glove and Cape, tier 19, go ahead and get a high Mythic Warforged of those, running the Legendary Belt, the Legendary Rings, Third and Sphere Unleashed, and then the tier 20 Helm, Shoulders, Chest, and Legs. That was the setup that we were looking at before they decided that they came out with, you know, before they decided on nerfing the tier 19 2-piece. So I'm glad they did that. They took us out of that conundrum of needing to continually run Nighthold in a newer tier. So essentially that's their thinking behind it. I'm kind of glad they did it. I thank them for it, because it just makes decisions for everyone across the board all that much easier and just plain nicer, because it doesn't make it as asinine as it really could have been. Essentially, too, back when it was still PTR, tier 20 was looking a little bit different. The 2 set was that Blade of Justice generated an additional holy power, and the 4 set was that Judgment also increases damage of Blade of Justice. They decided to flip those around. Early testing was showing that the 2 set was way more powerful than the 4 set, because generating that additional holy power gave you an instant Templar's Verdict. An instant Templar's Verdict is way more beneficial to us as Retribution Paladins than a 15, or what it's going to be on Tuesday, a 20% increase to Blade of Justice / Divine Hammers. So I'm definitely glad that they swapped those 2 around. So the 2 set now increases damage of Blade of Justice / Divine Hammers by, on Tuesday, once again, it'll be 20% for the 8 seconds. And that the Blade of Justice talent also generates an additional holy power is the 4 set. Which, that's exactly how it should be. The 4 set basically gives us an automatic instant Templar's Verdict, and there's really nowhere to say. I mean, that's just so much more powerful than, you know, not than a 15% damage increase to the Blade of Justice talent. You know, when I looked at those initially on the PTR and tested it out, it just didn't make any sense for them to be that way around. But I'm glad they did that change. But anyways, looking forward, going into 2, a vast majority of the fights are looking like they will be single target fights. So my talent setup and suggestion recommendation going forward is going to basically look like this. Final verdict, of course, Consecration Just sucks. Don't even think about execution. They didn't even touch it. Sucks. Don't even think about it. Just ignore those two talents. Fires of Justice, of course, to speed the spec up. Because the only time Zeal would pull ahead, still in my sims as well, is if you had that constant 2-boss cleave. And even then, when we did in Nighthold, it still didn't pull ahead. So Zeal is kind of another one of those forgotten talents. And then basically just go down the middle. Tier 45 is your choice. Blinding Light, Repentance, Justice. Because they took the damaging aspect of Blinding Light and Repentance off. So there's no more DPS increase by taking Blinding Light, which I had been advocating and taking up until this point. Because casting Blinding Light did do additional damage to all targets it hit. So if you timed that out right with 15 stacks Crusade, it was actually a pretty good chunk. Especially if you put it in where you had a free global cooldown. Blade of Wrath then, because the proc chance on resetting Blade of Justice is just way much more powerful still than the crits, dealing 3 times more damage. Since we start suffering diminishing returns from crit, I think I messed around in SimCraft one day. If I remember right, it was like 60% or 75% crit area, where Virtue's Blade actually would be halfway's worthwhile, and still it was only like a 3 or 4k DPS difference, so it was within standard deviation. So it's not even worth it, because it would change your gearing aspect, completely. So stick with Blade of Wrath. 75 tier, do what you want. I mean, if you need self-heals for progression, I wouldn't take Justicar's Vengeance. I would stay with Word of Glory. Just for the main fact that it heals yourself and 2 other targets. Or 5 of the friendly targets. So not only healing yourself, you heal 5 others, so you heal 6 people in total with it if you need that, quick heal. Don't use Justicar's Vengeance. Justicar's Vengeance is just a waste of 5 holy power for the amount of health that it could heal. 0.5 mil versus 0.5 mil. Basically, Word of Glory and Justicar's Vengeance do the same amount of healing, but one just takes 3 holy power versus 4. I stick with the eye for an eye in case I have an ad hitting me and I need another, defensive cooldown. 90 tier, once again, it's up to you. If you want to be nice to the healers, take Judgment of the Light, help them out. I personally stick with Cavalier now because I like being able to run out with a mechanic and then jump right back in as fast as I ran out with the same, after taking the mechanic out, so I don't lose too much boss uptime. Key as a Retribution Paladin is maximize your uptime, smack the boss as much as you can, and kind of tunnel as much as you can without really tunneling and being called an idiot. So that's kind of why I take Cavalier. Divine Intervention, though, if you want to stick with that for progression, it's still a great talent. Automatically triggers your shield. There's no way to go wrong there. And then finally the 100 tier, of course, Crusade. If you take anything else, you're stupid. If I need to explain why, you should really not be playing your Paladin. You really need to reroll. So that's essentially what the talent setup going into Tomb, for the most part, is going to look like. There might be some variations for a fight or two here and there, where you might want to take Divine Hammers. But like I said, 860. There's no benefit to taking Divine Hammers at this point over a Blade of Wrath. So I mean, that's just a quick little rundown. That's what we're looking at here going into 2. And for 725. Retribution, honestly, I believe is in a better spot than most people are giving it credit for. So, wait it out a few weeks, see what happens before making your knee-jerk reactions. Give them a little bit. I think it's going to feel a lot better. I do believe as well, after this first week of Tomb, they will give us another round of buffs. The 3.5% flat, I don't think is enough. There needs to be a little bit more. So hopefully that does come along, but if it doesn't, we're just going to have to deal with it, because going into Argus, I feel we're going to be one of the strongest classes, mainly because of the rework to Blessing of the Ashbringer. Hopefully they leave it alone now and don't decide they want to touch it going forward, and that'll be to the best of our ability. But anyways, this has been the first edition of Case Files here from Juice by Gaming. Hope you enjoyed it. Gonna be doing this once a week, streaming it as well. If you'd like, you could also join me in my Discord during these discussions. But until next time, folks, this is my Weaver here at Juice by Gaming, signing off. Stay frosty, my friends.